Picture this: a 72-year-old grandfather living in a quiet Sacramento suburb, former cop, father of 3 successful daughters. The kind of guy who yells at kids to get off his lawn and complains about his neighbor's barking dogs. Nothing special, right? Wrong. This seemingly ordinary retiree was hiding the darkest secret imaginable. For over 40 years, Joseph James DeAngelo had fooled everyone. His wife, his children, his neighbors, even the FBI. He was the phantom who terrorized California for more than a decade, attacking over 100 victims in their own homes. Police called him by different names: the Visalia Ransacker, the East Area Rapist, the original Night Stalker. But we know him as the Golden State Killer, one of the most prolific serial criminals in American history. And here's the craziest part: he was a cop the entire time he was committing these heinous crimes. This is the story of how a monster hid in plain sight for 4 decades, and how a website meant for finding your ancestors ended up exposing one of America's most elusive killers. It started in 1974 in Visalia, California, a small city where everyone knew their neighbors and nobody locked their doors. That would change forever. Someone was breaking into homes, not just a few, but eventually over 120 burglaries that left residents paranoid and confused. The intruder wasn't after expensive items. He'd take single earrings, family photos, women's underwear. He'd ransack drawers, scatter clothing, and sometimes just stand in bedrooms watching people sleep. Police called him the Visalia Ransacker, but they had no idea they were dealing with someone who understood their every move. That's because the man terrorizing their community was one of their own. Joseph DeAngelo was a police officer in nearby Exeter, just 10 miles away. On September 11, 1975, the ransacker became a killer. Professor Claude Snelling woke up to strange noises at 2 a.m. and found a masked man trying to kidnap his 16-year-old daughter from her bedroom. When Snelling tried to save her, DeAngelo shot him twice. As the professor staggered back into his house and died in his wife's arms, DeAngelo did something that would become his signature. He kicked the daughter 3 times in the face before vanishing into the night. The attack was methodical, planned, vicious. Police found sophisticated pry tools at the scene, the kind only someone with law enforcement training would use. DeAngelo had crossed a line, and this was just the beginning of his evolution into something far more terrifying. By 1976, DeAngelo had moved on to bigger hunting grounds. Now, working as a police officer in Auburn, he began stalking the suburbs of Sacramento. The Visalia Ransacker was gone, but something far worse had taken his place: the East Area Rapist. His method was horrifying in its precision. He'd spend weeks studying his victims, breaking into their homes when they weren't there, learning their routines, unlocking windows for easy entry later. Sometimes he'd call them beforehand, breathing heavily into the phone, letting them know they were being watched. The attacks followed a sickening pattern. He'd strike between 2 and 4 a.m., always wearing a ski mask, waking victims with a flashlight in their eyes and a knife at their throat. If there was a man in the house, DeAngelo would stack dishes on his back and tie him up, threatening to kill everyone if he heard them rattle. Then he'd take the woman to another room. The psychological torture was deliberate. He'd pretend to leave, only to return hours later. He'd eat their food, drink their beer, rifle through family photos while his victims lay bound and terrified. In one attack, he told victim number 37, "I hate you, Bonnie," the name of his ex-fiancée who had rejected him years earlier. Between 1976 and 1979, he attacked over 50 victims across multiple counties, and the whole time, he was wearing a badge. Then, in 1979, something happened that should have stopped him. DeAngelo was caught shoplifting a hammer and a can of dog repellent from a store. For a cop, this was career suicide. He was fired immediately, but losing his badge didn't stop his crimes. It only made him more dangerous. December 1979 marked a terrifying transformation. The rapist had become a killer, and he'd moved his hunting grounds to Southern California. His first known murder as the original Night Stalker was savage. He bludgeoned Robert Offerman and Deborah Manning to death in Goleta. The violence was escalating, becoming more brutal with each attack. He wasn't just killing. He was destroying lives in the most vicious ways imaginable. February 1978 had already shown his capacity for murder when Brian and Katie Maggiore were walking their dog in their Rancho Cordova neighborhood. DeAngelo confronted them, and when they tried to run, he hunted them down like animals. Brian was shot first. Katie managed to get away, screaming for help, but DeAngelo chased her down and shot her in the head. Witnesses heard her final desperate pleas echoing through the suburban streets. The randomness of it sent shockwaves through Sacramento. If you couldn't even walk your dog safely, when were you safe? The killing spree continued relentlessly. Lyman and Charlene Smith were bludgeoned to death in their Ventura home in 1980. Keith and Patrice Harrington, newlyweds, were murdered in Dana Point. Manuela Witthun was killed while her husband was in the hospital. The murders followed his signature pattern. Victims were bound, tortured for hours, then killed with extreme violence. By 1986, he'd murdered at least 13 people across California. Then, suddenly, mysteriously, the original Night Stalker vanished. May 1986 was his last known attack, the murder of 18-year-old Janelle Cruz. After terrorizing California for over a decade, the Golden State Killer simply disappeared into the night. While California slept with their doors locked and guns under their pillows, Joseph DeAngelo was living the American dream. In 1973, right before his crime spree began, he'd married Sharon Marie Huddle, an ambitious law student who would become a successful divorce attorney. They bought a house in Citrus Heights, the same neighborhood where he'd committed his first rape as the East Area Rapist. The audacity was breathtaking. He was raising his family in his own hunting grounds. 3 daughters came along, one in 1981, another in 1986, and the youngest in 1989. While he was destroying families, he was building his own. His daughters grew up to be remarkably successful. One became an ER physician, another a graduate student at UC Davis. They had no idea their father was the boogeyman who'd terrorized their state. How could they? He went to work, mowed his lawn, attended family gatherings. Sure, he was odd. Neighbors said he'd have explosive outbursts over minor things, screaming profanities about barking dogs. But in suburbia, that just made him the cranky neighbor, not a serial killer. The double life was meticulous. Sharon later revealed she worked graveyard shifts at Jack in the Box and studied late at law school. When she wasn't around, she trusted he was working or visiting his parents hundreds of miles away. I trusted the defendant when he told me he had to go to work or was going pheasant hunting, she'd later write. They even slept in separate bedrooms. She thought it was just marital problems. The scariest part? DeAngelo attended community meetings about neighborhood safety. He literally sat in rooms where terrified residents discussed protecting themselves from him. After retiring as a mechanic in 2017, he was just another retiree living with his daughter and granddaughter, probably taking his grandkid to school, going to the grocery store, living a perfectly normal life while his victims still woke up screaming from nightmares. While DeAngelo was playing grandfather in Citrus Heights, a true crime writer in Los Angeles was consumed by his case. Michelle McNamara wasn't a detective or FBI agent. She was a blogger who ran a website called True Crime Diary. But she had something authorities didn't, an obsession that bordered on compulsion. She spent years poring over police reports, interviewing victims, embedding herself in online communities of amateur investigators. She gave him a new name that would stick: the Golden State Killer. Before her, he was known by different names in different jurisdictions, which had actually helped him evade capture. By connecting all his crimes under one terrifying moniker, she unified the hunt. McNamara's investigation went deeper than anyone expected from a civilian. She created spreadsheets of victim characteristics, mapped attack locations, analyzed his evolving methods. She'd stay up until 4 a.m. reading case files, the same hours when DeAngelo used to strike. Her husband, comedian Patton Oswalt, would find her surrounded by crime scene photos and witness testimonies. She was building psychological profiles, geographical patterns, even creating era-appropriate playlists to get into the mindset of 1970s California. She was convinced he was still alive, still out there living a normal life. The title of her book came from one of the most chilling things DeAngelo ever said to 15-year-old victim Chris Pedretti in 1976. He whispered, "You'll be silent forever, and I'll be gone in the dark." But McNamara was determined to drag him into the light. Tragically, she died suddenly in April 2016 at age 46, her book unfinished, never knowing how close she was to being right. I'll Be Gone in the Dark was published posthumously in February 2018, becoming a bestseller and reigniting public interest in the case. Just 2 months later, the killer she'd hunted was caught. Her obsession had kept the case alive when police had given up hope. For decades, investigators had the Golden State Killer's DNA. They had it from crime scenes, from rape kits, from evidence collected throughout the 70s and 80s. But DNA was useless if you couldn't match it to anyone. DeAngelo had never been arrested for a felony, so his genetic profile wasn't in any criminal database. The evidence sat there for 40 years, holding answers that nobody could read. Until 2018, when investigator Paul Holes had a crazy idea that would change criminal justice forever. What if they uploaded the killer's DNA to GED Match, a free genealogy website where people submit their genetic profiles to find long-lost relatives? It was a long shot. The site only had about 1 million users. But in April 2018, they got a hit. Not a direct match, but something almost as good. Distant relatives, third or fourth cousins of the killer. Working with genealogist Barbara Ray Venter, investigators began the painstaking process of building family trees. They constructed 25 different trees containing about 1,000 people total, tracing bloodlines back to the 1800s. From this massive pool, they narrowed it down using what they knew: the killer's age, his connections to California, his physical description. One name kept coming up: Joseph James DeAngelo. But they needed definitive proof. Investigators put him under surveillance, waiting for their chance. Then DeAngelo made a simple mistake that would end his 40-year run. He threw away a tissue. They also swabbed his car door handle. When they ran the DNA from these items against the crime scene evidence, it was a perfect match. The technology that caught him didn't even exist when he was committing his crimes. A website designed to help adoptees find their birth parents had just solved one of America's most infamous cold cases. April 24th, 2018. DeAngelo was in his yard when Sacramento County deputies surrounded his Citrus Heights home. The 72-year-old former cop supposedly muttered, "I have a roast in the oven," before they took him away. But once he was alone in the interrogation room, thinking nobody was listening, the real Joseph DeAngelo emerged. "I did all those things," he said to himself. "I destroyed all those lives." He rambled about someone named Jerry, an alter ego he blamed for the crimes. "I didn't have the strength to push him out. He made me. He went with me." After 40 years of silence, the Golden State Killer was finally talking. The news exploded across California. Victims who had spent decades looking over their shoulders, installing extra locks, sleeping with weapons, finally had a face to put to their nightmares. And what a face it was. Not the young, agile predator they remembered, but a pathetic old man in a wheelchair. The courtroom confrontations in August 2020 were devastating. Jane Carson Sandler, raped in 1976 while her 3-year-old son was tied up nearby, looked him straight in the eye. I was frozen in fear beyond description. My attention was not on the rape, but fully on where did you put my son? Victim after victim stood up, calling him subhuman, devil incarnate, the monster who ruined my life. Chris Pedretti, raped at 15, told him, "The night you broke into my home, I was a normal teenager. The next morning, I woke up knowing I would never be a child again." One victim's daughter gave him the middle finger. Another said, "You spent 70 years carefree while your victims lived with lifelong scars." Even his ex-wife Sharon submitted a statement, revealing she now suffered from PTSD and could never trust anyone again. On the final day, DeAngelo stood up from his wheelchair, revealing his feebleness had been an act, and spoke 6 words. "I'm truly sorry to everyone I've hurt. Life without parole." He admitted to 161 crimes, including dozens of rapes he could no longer be charged with. The Golden State Killer would die in a cage. Joseph DeAngelo is now serving multiple life sentences without parole at California State Prison in Corcoran. But his capture changed everything about how we solve cold cases. Since his arrest, Genealogy has identified over 150 suspects in murders and rapes across America. The same technology that exposed him is now hunting hundreds of other killers who thought they got away with it. Every criminal who left DNA at a crime scene is now vulnerable, and they don't even know it. All it takes is one distant cousin uploading their DNA to a genealogy site for fun, and suddenly, a killer's 40-year secret is exposed. The ripple effects destroyed more than just DeAngelo's freedom. Sharon Huddle, his wife of 45 years, filed for divorce immediately after his arrest. In her victim impact statement, she revealed the true cost of his double life. "I trusted he was doing what he told me he was doing. Now, I live every day with the knowledge of how he severely damaged hundreds of innocent people's lives." His 3 daughters, once proud of their father, had to grapple with the fact that the man who raised them was a monster. One daughter and granddaughter were living with him when he was arrested. Imagine discovering your grandfather is the boogeyman. But here's what should really keep you up at night. DeAngelo stopped killing in 1986. He lived as a free man for another 32 years. He attended family gatherings, walked his dog, went grocery shopping, maybe even stood behind you in line at Starbucks. He watched news coverage of his own crimes, saw Michelle McNamara on TV talking about hunting him, probably even Googled himself to see if police were getting close. For over 3 decades, one of America's worst serial killers was hiding in plain sight, protected by the simple fact that DNA technology hadn't caught up to him yet. And if he could do it for that long, how many others are out there right now, living normal lives, thinking they're safe? The answer might be sitting in a genealogy database, waiting for the right match. The Golden State Killer thought he'd beaten the system. He'd literally been inside the system. A cop who used his badge and training to become California's worst nightmare. He knew how investigations worked, knew how to avoid leaving evidence, knew how to disappear into the dark, just like he promised. For 40 years, he was right. He raised a family, retired comfortably, and probably thought he'd take his secrets to the grave. But here's the beautiful irony. He was caught by technology that didn't even exist when he was terrorizing California. Not by DNA evidence itself, but by his own family's DNA, submitted to a genealogy website by relatives who just wanted to know where they came from. Think about this. Somewhere in America right now, someone is spitting into a tube, excited to discover they're 23% Irish or find a long-lost cousin. They have no idea that their innocent family tree project might expose their relative as a killer. Every day, the genetic net gets wider. Every profile uploaded makes it harder for killers to hide. The Golden State Killer proved that you can run for decades. You can fool everyone around you. You can even be the very person who's supposed to catch criminals. But you can't hide from your own blood. Joseph DeAngelo spent 32 years after his last murder thinking he was untouchable. He watched his victims grow old with trauma while he played grandfather. But in the end, the monster who promised to vanish into the dark was dragged into the light by the one thing he never saw coming: his own DNA, waiting patiently in evidence lockers for technology to catch up. And if they could catch him after 40 years, imagine what's coming for the killers who think they're safe today. Time's up. The only question is, who's next?